This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and today I am painting Nidalee. This lady from Tanuki Figures. Yes, that means this video was sponsored by Tanuki Figures. A little bit more about them later. Now, I'm going to be totally honest, I actually have no idea who this character is, but I'm still going to be able to paint it even if I don't know who it is. And I'm going to start out with this base, which is, I'm gonna be honest, looking very, very colorful. Also, I just want to actually mention that I have done a zenithal, but this time I've really pretty much left the whole back of the model almost pretty much black in complete shadow, and I'm gonna see how this translates in large stature scale thing, because this is actually a miniature painting thing whereby you force the light. So I'm going to force the light on this model and see what it comes out like. Also, I'm filming this with an actual camera, so things might be a little bit weird while I get used to using a camera, a real one. And so, as I said in the beginning of the video, we're going to be using some miniature painting techniques to paint this model, namely just the light source thing. And I obviously start off with a layer of pinkle over that light source that I laid down, being very careful not to put any of that pinkle onto the black areas, because I want to spray red onto the black areas, and the blend between the two is fantastic. Now I'm going to take some burnt flesh, and I'm going to use 50% water and 50% paint and spray that through my airbrush, basically almost over everything. I'm still going to leave some shadows in there, and then I'm going to take some base flesh and spray that in the same manner. However, as you can tell, I'm having a slight issue with my airbrush. This is because the water in my area is a little bit hard, and I'm pretty sure this is leading to drying in the nozzle a little bit quicker than it necessarily needs to. Now, moving swiftly on, I'm going to dry the model before I move on to using some sunny skin tone. Now, this layer is going to go much over all the highlights, and I'm pretty much going to try and avoid putting that at all into the shadowed areas. Next, I'm going to take Orcish Domus, and this one I thin quite a bit, probably around 60 to 70% water, and the rest is paint. I'm going to spray that into the shadows, as well as into the underparts and bendy parts of her body. Next, I'm going to take some rosy flesh. The same thing here, I'm thinning this down around 60% water, and I'm going to spray that over everything. Now, moving on to basic skin tone, I'm going to use this more direct into just the highlighted areas, and I'm going to add a bit of white ink into this, and I'm going to force the highlights just a little bit more. Notice that I did not move off from the highlighted areas of the model. Now I'm going to take some Gilliman flesh and spray that into the shadows. This will bring some much needed color back into those desaturated skin tones. Now, going into the shadows with some Caribou Crimson, because this is a deep red, it's quite dark, it's going to help bring back some of the pink, but it's also going to add a lot more shadow into the shadowed areas. You can already see how the one arm is a little bit redder than the rest, and this helps to push it back into the shadows. Reichland Flesh Shade comes back in over the top of all of that and just seals the deal. Now I need to tan her skin a little bit more, and strangely enough, adding yellow as a very slight tint over the top of the surface helps to tan the skin. Now I can put that aside while I work on the base. And for the base, what I'm going to do is take a neutral grey, and I'm going to just dry brush that over, yes, already the skin tones that are left on the base. This is going to leave a natural colour in between the crevasses of the rocks and just help with this naturally colourful base. This base, to be honest, has got a lot of colours in it, so we're going to have to think really carefully how we do this. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is go back over that natural grey and deck tan layer that I had put down with some tints, because I want to change the colour of that surface, and putting down the grey and the deck tan was only just to bring out the textures. So I'm now able to come back in with some contrast paints in my airbrush, and if I'm careful enough and don't overspray too much, I can just pretty much tint the colours of everything that is around the base, as you can see I'm doing right now. Now for the grasses and the greenery that is on this base, I am going to need quite a lot of greens, I'm going to be totally honest. But before I get to that, I'm going to add Skeleton Horde over some of the rocks to give them a yellowy tint. I came back with a little bit of deck tan again to dry brush some of the edges and make them a bit brighter, but I really need some more greens and I just don't have them. So I'm going to go down to my rack and get them. I have selected a variety of greens to go with the greens that I currently have, ranging from some bluey kind of greens to some dark desaturated greens and some really bright greens with quite a load of yellow in them. And I'm going to end up painting every single blade and leaf that there is on this base with one of those greens, and I'm going to mix them as I go, but there is no real reason for why I've chosen any specific green for any specific area. Perhaps maybe in my brain somewhere it told me that I should put the brighter ones towards the front, but realistically I didn't think along those lines. I just painted them green where they needed to be green, using a red to paint the ends of the reeds, because for some reason these reeds are red in the image renders. That's what I did. I'm now going to take some desert yellow and I'm going to paint the top portion of the tree trunk. This is because in the render, when I look back, I found that I had not painted this part lighter. I also used that same color to paint all of the shrooms that are on and around this base. Now I'm going to take some purple, which is essentially the same color as Pinkle, so it's basically not purple, and I'm going to paint the lotuses inside of the pond, and I'm going to use some orange on the other flowers that are on the outside of the pond. And then I'm going to put the model back onto its base so that I can use some Caribou Crimson and spray that once again, using the model as my guide for where the lights are. I'm going to spray that reddish tint over everything that is in the shadowed area of this model. And yes, that is going to ruin all of those colors. However, once it dries, it's going to create a nice depth and help to give us that illusion that the depth is there. And while that sets aside to dry, I can start working on the rest of the model and the details that are on the model. I took some browns in the form of Cygor brown for her stockings and leather brown for her hair, and then some red leather, which is also a brownie kind of color. I'm going to paint the leather pieces. I don't really know how to describe some of the bits that we're going to come across in this model, but I'll be totally honest, you just need a bunch of browns in order to paint them. There are a lot of this furry stuff on the model, and for that I'm going to use deck tan obviously, and for those red leather areas I'm going to take some Reikland Flesh Shade and spray that into the shadows of those areas. I'm then going to use a different brown, which in this case is a chestnut brown, to paint the hide piece that is pretty much covering the bobs. And I'm going to turn my airbrush down and carefully spray Agrax Earthshade into the shadows of that. This video was sponsored by Tanuki Figures. This is a Patreon over on Patreon where you will get monthly access to STL files to 3D print and paint your own figures. In one of their months, you usually would get 3 premium full-size figures, 3 busts, a chibi, 1 extra and a toon, as well as the 6 models in the welcome pack. It's a pretty damn good deal. Check out the description for a link to Tanuki Figures, and by the way, If you use the code GROUND, you will get a 50% off the model from this video in their Patreon. Go check it out right now, and thank you to Tanuki Figures for sponsoring this video. Now I can get back to adding the details and complete painting all of the fur, or whatever you call. I don't know what you're calling this stuff, but it is a very difficult thing to paint, particularly because when you thin down deck tan, it does like to splatter a little bit, and if you get any splatters, you're gonna have a bad time, because for some reason deck tan doesn't like to be rubbed off with water. Moving swiftly on, I'm going to paint all the little details on those leather pieces, the laces that tie it up, which are green and red, and I painted those as carefully as I possibly could. Then taking some Cygor brown, I painted her nails on her feet. And taking some Monument Hobbies bronze, I can then paint over the cuffs on her arms, which are meant to be golden in color. Now I'm going to use red leather again to paint her skirt leather, because in my mind this is probably the same material, and to be fair, looking at the renders, it pretty much looks like it's the same material. Now for a really difficult part on this, I'm going to use a dark brown, and I'm going to carefully use the side of my brush, and I'm going to paint over that fishnet stocking that is on her legs. I'll be totally honest with you, I did this twice, and that is because I painted it with Cygor brown, and that is way too thin of a paint to use. You need something that is dry, definitely not any kind of contrast paint. I then pretty much fixed it up and came back and did it again with the darker paint that is a little bit more dry, and then worked on some of the shadows on that dress, and I sprayed that in using my airbrush and came back in over the top of that and painted all of the fluffy furry stuff, and then all the trimming stuff. I also used bronze over the cuffs on her hands, which are actually bracelets and not cuffs, so I have no idea why I called them cuffs, but if you ignore that part and move on to a little bit more of the furry stuff on her arms. And to add depth to that, by the way, what I did was sprayed a skeleton horde with my airbrush on a low setting so that I could get it in carefully without getting it absolutely everywhere. Now carefully using brush control, I'm going to paint red over the necklace things, and you may notice that I didn't paint white down first, and there is a very good reason for this, and that is because we want all of that depth from the shadows to just ruin the red, because it forces it into shadow and makes it look like it has the shadow that we're trying to create. And now with that done, I can start working on other details on the model, like for example the handle of her spear. And for this, I just dry brushed this with a little bit of deck tan, and then I painted in some of that snakebite leather into the crevasses to make it not look so weird. I used some orange on the edges of the feathers, and then I used deck tan to paint the teeth on there. I also took some of that orange and painted it with my brush. I should have maybe mentioned earlier that the original orange I sprayed on using my airbrush on a low pressure. I then gave the same treatment to those teeth that I would to all teeth, which is to paint the skeleton horde with the airbrush from the bottom, and then I dry brushed some silver over the sharp pointy part of the spear. I then used the reds and greens to paint the threads, and I took some of that Cygor brown to paint back her nails, this time on her hand. Now taking some Caribou Crimson with the whole model together, I can spray that over some of the details that never got it earlier. This is going to reinforce what was there before, and also to put that over the parts that I had added later. Now using deck tan, very very thin, like literally probably 5% paint to 95% water, I'm going to hand paint the markings that are on her body. These are quite difficult to do, I'm not going to lie, but by using a tapping motion with my brush, I am able to make it look somewhat like it was painted on the model in reality. I don't even know how to explain it, but I'm pretty sure you understand what I mean. I'm going to now start working on the portrait of this model, and the similar thing that I did on the spear and all the other bones on the model, I painted them deck tan and used skeleton horde as the shadows. Now I'm going to take some Griff Charger grey, and I'm going to spray that carefully into the areas of her eyes where eyeshadow would be, and using Magos purple, I'm going gonna paint her lips with one solid coat of that. Now I can take some black and paint the inside of her eyes, being careful to kind of line the eyeliner, because obviously I want that to stand out when I come back a little bit later with a brighter color and paint the insides. Now I'm gonna paint her eyebrows, and I use Cygor Brown for her eyebrows using short, sharp motions with the smallest brush that I actually have. I'm going to make sure that these things are as equal as possible, because if they're not, you're going to have a weird looking model. Now taking some red, I can paint the threads that hold her earrings onto the piece of thing that goes through her ear, apparently, and I can also paint all of the beads that are in her hair. There are some that are gold, some that are red, and I painted them all individually. Now taking Highlight Skin, which is a color from the Nocturna Fairy Flesh set series. Yes, you can't get it, and no, deck tan is not the right color for it. I will try and find the right color for this in future, but I'm going to use this color to paint the insides of the eyes. This is called the sclera, as I have been told by the comments on one of my videos, and in fact on a couple of videos. Anyway, I'm now going to paint her eyes, and the eyes of this model are quite bright green, so I use a dark green first to make sure I get the shape and the outline edge of the irises. I then take a brighter green and place that in the center with a black dot over the top of that. I can then use white, and as you will notice, this is the only time that I actually use white, and that is to add a specular highlight into the eyes of the model. Now I can take a dry brush, and I'm gonna dry brush with bronze. Yes, that sounds weird, but trust me, bronze as a dry brush over dark brown hair is the most amazing trick you will ever know in your life. And before we complete this model, I need to paint the frog that is on the base, and I'm gonna just paint that with a zenithal, using a bit of green over the top to get that green onto the frog. I'm then gonna paint black on his eyes, red on his toes, and stick it onto the base and call this model done. So we have made it yet again to the end of another Groundeffected video, and I want to say a massive thank you to anyone who decided to click on this video. Of course, if you haven't already, please click the subscribe button. We're so close to 100,000 subscribers, and that would be pretty cool if we could make it there. Also, I want to say a massive thank you to my patrons. Those are the people who keep the lights blinding my eyeballs and allow me to do this weird thing that apparently is a job for some reason. Of course, this is the part of the video where I have to tell you to go check out the description for a link to the model, but more importantly than that, if you don't like anything you saw, this is the time when you should actually you should have done it earlier, to be honest, but yeah, fuck off.